Good afternoon. Welcome to Cool Springs. Today is Wednesday, May the 27th, 2026, and this is our series on the book of Ecclesiastes. As we have been doing the book of Ecclesiastes in one of our midweek studies, we were concurrently doing a study of Song of Solomon, both of which were written by Solomon. Today we concluded Song of Solomon, and now we're going to be doing just Ecclesiastes for the next couple of weeks. And what we're seeing in Ecclesiastes is Solomon has written the book of Ecclesiastes toward the end of his life, toward the end of his 40-year reign. And during last week's session, he was looking at life and going, what's the point of everything? Vanity of vanity, everything's vanities. There's a time for every purpose under the heaven. And then it was contrasting. Time to be born with a time to die. Time of peace, time of war. You had a various, like 8 different contrasts there. Because everybody goes through life with the idea of sooner or later, you maybe reach a midlife crisis, or you have a series of setbacks, or you've tried everything and now you're beginning to wonder, what's the point? What's the purpose of everything? Solomon doesn't have setbacks in terms of enjoying wealth, and prosperity. He never has to worry, like so many others do, about where his next meal is coming from. He doesn't have to worry about keeping a roof over his family's head. He's the king. He's very, very wealthy. He's got all kinds of resources available to him. So from that standpoint, he doesn't struggle with life like so many adults do, where they may be facing job loss or changes in their health that force them to give up careers that they've had to go do something else or to take a disability pension. He's not having to deal with that, but he's tried so many things looking to fill the God-sized hole in his heart. He's tried wine, women, and song. Oh boy, has he tried those things. Over the course of his life, he hasn't been satisfied with just having one wife. He's had over 700 wives and 300 concubines. And he's discovered that engaging in physical pleasure doesn't fill the God-sized hole in his heart. He's gone seeking after all kinds of knowledge, from history, from science. He studied plants, he studied nature, he studied how the cycle of rain and times of dryness have occurred, and how the rivers and the lakes fill up, and how there are times of drought. He studied all kinds of things, seeking to fill the God-sized hole in his heart. And he keeps running into this vanity of vanity, everything's vanities, because nothing's really satisfying the hole in his heart. And I mentioned at the end of last week that it sounds pretty depressing because he's going through a definite blues phase in his life. What's the meaning of everything? Why am I here? And today, as we're going into chapters 5 and 6 of Ecclesiastes, Solomon is starting to turn the emotional and intellectual corner a little bit to see that, yes, God's plan for humanity is that we have a full and abundant life, and that there's only one way to find joy and peace and abundance in life, and that's when you give yourself totally to God and you follow God's will for your life. So in chapter 5 today, he's looking for your purpose in life. And he's saying, guard your steps as you go to the house of the Lord, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring a matter to the presence of God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of the fool through many words. Those first 3 verses there, he's recognizing that when you go to the temple to worship God, it needs to be that you're going to worship with a sincere heart, and that you're willing more to listen to what God has to say to you than to give God or anybody else, well, this is God, this is what I want, this is what I think I need. That you can't just go through the motions of worship, that you need to be truly seeking God. When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. Making vows was always a choice. They would go to the temple. There were certain prescribed sacrifices for sin offerings, for guilt offerings, but there were also free will offerings. And the vows were always connected to the free will offering, something somebody would decide, I want to, out of my own gratitude to God, for God being God, for what God has done for me. I am choosing to make this extra sacrifice to fulfill this vow. And he's saying, don't just lightly mouth the words and then decide you didn't mean it later on. That you've made the promise to God. God didn't force you to make that promise. But keep your word. Keep your word to God just like you want to keep your word to your fellow man for the sake of your own reputation in the community. But keep your word to God. It's better not to make a vow than to flippantly make one and then decide I'm not going to follow through. It's better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. Do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. In other words, not taking responsibility. You probably know people like that. The goal is you don't want to be that kind of person yourself, where even when it's pointed out that you've messed up some kind of way, you always have a good excuse that even when you're, quote, apologizing, you're really blaming somebody else. Adam in the garden, when God asked him, who told you you were naked? Have you eaten of the fruit of the tree where I told you not to eat? What was Adam's response? It was one of these responses where he's saying it was all a mistake. He's blaming Eve, and he's also blaming God. That woman that you gave me of the fruit, and I did eat. See, he wasn't taking responsibility for his actions. So here in Ecclesiastes, Solomon, now in his more mature senior adult years, is looking back on the course of his life and the people he's encountered. And he's realizing there are a lot of people who just won't ever take responsibility for when they've fallen short of God's plan. Don't say in the presence of the messenger of God, whether it's a priest, a prophet, a spiritual advisor, that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness. Rather, fear God. And we know that when the scripture talks about fearing God, it means to show reverence for who God is, to be aware of the fact that you and I are the sinful, fallen creation, and that in spite of the fact that we are sinners, God so loves us that he was willing to pay our sin penalty for us. And so we always need to be in awe of God's mercy, in awe of his grace, humbled by the fact that he loves us and is willing to show mercy to us, and not be arrogant enough to think that we can put one over on God and get away with taking God lightly. Somebody who would make a voluntary vow and then say, well, that was just a mistake. Basically, they're blowing God off. They're taking God lightly. And Solomon realizes, no, you need to be serious about your faith in God. For in many dreams and many words there's emptiness. Rather, fear, reverence God. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province. Do not be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. He knows what he's talking about. He's acquired all kinds of possessions, all kinds of riches, all kinds of fields and servants, and all of the material wealth of the world. And he's realized that just having the fullest storehouse, the biggest barn with the most grain, with the most chariots, the most horses, that all these kinds of things don't bring him the satisfaction of his soul. And he's saying, look, you shouldn't be surprised when you see injustice and oppression. Now that may sound like a strange thing coming from the guy who was king of the country, because who is in the best position to see to it that justice is administered, that wrongdoing is punished? The king is in the best position to do that. But he recognizes that, look, we've set up a system of officials, of courts, of judges to see to it that when people who are naturally sinners do wrong things, that there is a path that the victim can seek and find justice, that we've got all these officials looking out for each other and making sure that the right decisions are made. And he's saying, look, the more you try to depend on gathering wealth, thinking that it's going to buy you happiness and love, the more you're going to realize all the wealth in the world, all the possessions, aren't going to buy you the peace of heart, the love, and the security of being able to sleep at night because you know you are right with your Creator. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what's the advantage to their owners except to look on? Verse 12 you might want to highlight or underline. The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. Again, Solomon is speaking from personal experience there. He's never had to be a poor working man. But he's certainly seen plenty of people in his kingdom, and he realizes that, hey, these average citizens that are having to go out every day and work to provide food for themselves and their families, who are having to work hard to keep the roof over their head, to take care of their animals, they're able to sleep at night. Their sleep isn't disturbed by wondering what's next or how can I get more, that it's the rich who toss and turn at night because they haven't found the satisfaction of their soul. But the person who's working hard, doing the best that he can, and trying to take care of his family and take care of his relationship to God, that person can sleep like a baby at night because he's trusting in God's provision and care, and he doesn't have to hoard wealth or trample over his neighbor to gain more goods, to die with the most toys. That he understands that there's more to life than just what you did and how much wealth you acquired. Verse 13, there's a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. Just hanging on to stuff, possessions, hoarding wealth, doesn't bring you the satisfaction that you think you're going to get. When those riches were lost through a bad investment and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. Our modern equivalent of that, and you've probably heard sermons on this or heard people make sayings like this, and sometimes you may even see cartoons or pictures where people point out that there's never a U-Haul behind a hearse. You've gathered all this stuff, but you're going to die eventually anyway. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and I'm going to die one day, and somebody's going to have to wash the body and bury me. And then what happens to all the stuff? You see, Solomon's realizing in his post-midlife, now toward the senior citizen years, that the time he spent gathering all that wealth and accumulating for himself all kinds of wives and horses and chariots and stuff wasn't filling the God-sized hole in his heart. When those riches were lost, and you have a son, there's nothing to pass on to him. It's much more important that you pass on to your children the heritage of your character, your good name, that you've taught them right. You see, the big problem with Solomon, and we know from looking at Kings and Chronicles, that the one thing Solomon didn't do for his son who was going to follow him on the throne was to teach him how to be a godly man. Because when Solomon dies and his son Rehoboam is now being crowned as the new king, before the inaugural balls are over with, the people from 10 of the tribes have come to him and said, look, in your latter years, your father overtaxed us, overburdened us, made our lives difficult, and we're happy to serve you and have you be our king, but you need to treat us right. And his harsh response to them, because he didn't listen to the godly advice and he did listen to the other young people his own age, immediately, right out of the gate, cost him the loyalty of 10 of the 12 tribes. All of a sudden, he was ruler over a much smaller kingdom. And part of that was because Solomon didn't invest the time to be the kind of godly father, to raise up a godly son who would become a godly man. Solomon was very lacking in that regard, and he realizes now as an older man that just gathering wealth isn't going to take care of the problem in your heart. This also is a grievous evil. He doesn't just call it evil. He says these things are grievous evils. He said that about gathering stuff, but not raising your son right. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus will he die. So what's the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life, he also eats into darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger. Here's what I've seen to be a good thing. A good and fitting to eat, to drink, to enjoy myself in all of one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. He's looking back on the days when he thought, okay, I'm king, so I'm just going to do what I want. I'm going to live for me. I'm going to live it up, because after all, one day I'm going to get sick and old and die anyway, and I might as well have fun while I can, because nobody gets out alive. Everybody's going to die one day. But he's reflecting back on it, and he's realizing, nope, that didn't do it for me either. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he's also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward. And here's this key phrase at the end of verse 19. And rejoice in his labor, for this is the gift of God. To rejoice in your labor. When God created Adam and Eve, the very first human beings, he didn't just drop them off in the garden and say, satisfy yourself and don't worry about taking care of anything. No, he gave them work to do. They were supposed to tend the garden and keep it. They were supposed to take care of the animals. Why? Because there's dignity and there's value and there's worth in work. And Solomon realizes that God has given us the gift of doing something productive with our life. That yes, we're born and we have to be trained up in how we should go, and then we have our productive years, And when we reach our sunset years and we're no longer able physically to do the things that we used to do, and we realize that our strength is waning, and we know that the grave is in the relatively near future compared to when you were younger, that you can still take satisfaction in knowing that you're at rest in your soul because you've trusted God and that you've done the best you could to do something worthwhile, that you have a legacy to leave behind, that you haven't just been spinning your wheels, that you have a legacy to leave behind. The gift of God, that legacy of, I did something useful with my life. God, I did something for you. A lot of people, when they first retire, are going through periods of anxiety, or they're kind of restless. They're sort of adrift. Why? Because they've let too much of their sense of self-worth get tied up into what their occupation was. And they suddenly realized after they retired that, okay, I may have worked for this company for 20, 30, 50 years, but as soon as I retired, somebody else is now in that office, and it's no longer my office. They're making it their office. And pretty soon everybody who knew me and what I did for work will be retired and gone. What have I left behind? What did I spend 30, 40, 50 years of my life doing? Why did I spend all that time working for a living? Whereas if you've done the right thing in your personal life, if you've treated your spouse, your parents, if you've raised your children correctly, if you've been a good neighbor and a good friend, if you've helped where you could, that you're leaving behind a legacy of, here's a man or a woman that people can remember and fondly praise because, hey, I remember how that person pointed me towards Christ, how that person lived a good life, was good to their family, was good to their community, was engaged in life, leaving a legacy. And part of that work is that is a gift from God that you have labor to do, because God has given each of us individual talents and unique abilities. And if we do what we're supposed to with it and we give it back to Him through our labors, that we can rest when our time comes, knowing that I left it all on the field. I gave everything I had to take care of my family, to love God. For he will not consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. That, no, you may not ever get rich at what you're doing. That's why a lot of people who are in helping type of professions continue to serve, knowing that, okay, I may be living paycheck to paycheck, whereas if I did something else for a living, I might be breaking in the big bucks. But what I'm doing is making a difference in somebody's life. Whether it's somebody who's teaching or somebody who's in some other kind of helping profession, they know that their satisfaction comes from doing something that really mattered, that's going to make a difference long term in someone's life. Chapter 6, he's continuing to look back on life, and he's starting to make sense of the purpose of life. When we get to the very tail end of Ecclesiastes, which we're just a couple of weeks from doing, we're going to see that he finally gets the answer absolutely right. He's still working his way towards getting it right here. There is an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it's prevalent among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that his soul lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet, and yet is another way of contrasting. It's like saying, but, yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, however many they may be, but his soul is not satisfied, with good things, and he does not even have a proper burial, then I say, better the miscarriage than he, for it comes in futility and goes into obscurity, and its name is covered in obscurity. In other words, if you have kids but you don't raise them right, part of your legacy is tarnished. You'll be gone and forgotten almost before the burial is completed. Solomon's realizing that you need to invest in your family, that you need to leave a good legacy behind. It never sees the sun and it never knows anything. It's better off than he, even if the other man lives 1,000 years twice and does not enjoy good things. Do not all go to one place? He's saying that out of, remember, this is an Old Testament perspective, and he's still coming out of his, what's the point of being good? Why can't I just satisfy myself? Because he's already tried wine, women, and song. He's already tried acquiring all kinds of wealth. He's already tried everything that the world tells you. Oh, if you get this, then you've got it made, then you've achieved the heights. He's done everything. He's tried everything. And he's realized there's still a hole there. When he says, do we not all go to the same place? In the Old Testament, they understood the concept of Sheol, the place of the dead. They also understand that even within Sheol, there is a punishment side, Hades or hell, and there is a paradise side. Solomon's own father, David, when David had sinned by taking Bathsheba and murdering her husband to cover up his sexual peccadillo, and the child that he conceived with Bathsheba was very, very ill and died on the day that they would have circumcised him and given him a name. David at that point is telling his servants, who are wondering, why is he now allowing us to comfort him when the child was so sick he wouldn't eat, or he wouldn't bathe himself, or he wouldn't let us do anything to comfort him? David understood that the child was dead, that no doctor, no medicine would bring him back. But David understood that my son can't come back to me, but I'm going where he's going. David knew that there was a paradise side of Sheol where he and everybody else from the Old Testament were going to be until God took care of our sin penalty once and for all, when Jesus died on the cross and descended to paradise, to that part of the abode of the dead where the Old Testament saints who were looking forward to God's redemption were there waiting on God to redeem them. Solomon at this point is just coming out of his depression. He knows because he was raised by a godly father and mother. David and Bathsheba raised Solomon right, but Solomon's now an old man, and he's looking back and he's realized he jettisoned or forgot about a lot of the things that his parents had told him, and he's tried everything under the sun, and he's broken all the rules, and it hasn't brought satisfaction to his soul. But when he says here that do we not all go to one place, that's not technically correct. He knows that people who have done deliberate evil are going to face eternal punishment, that there is no do-over after you die. But he also knows that the people who followed God, who walked after God's statutes like his father David had done, that God would redeem them. And so when he says here, do we not all go to one place? He's working his way through what's the meaning of life. And he's not 100% there yet, but he's at least on the right path. All man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does a wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eye see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and a striving after the wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is, for he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he. For there are many words which increase futility. what then is the advantage to man? He's asking, what's the purpose in life? Why are we here? He's seeing that human beings are evil and that sometimes people do evil things and they don't always face punishment here on earth for it. But he's got to trust that God, the full righteous judge, will do justice and that the righteous will be rewarded. Verse 12, and you might want to underline this. He asks a question here. For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime? Who knows what's good for a man during his lifetime? He'll get the answer finally. He's not there yet, but the answer is God knows. Solomon has been looking everywhere, in all kinds of places, to see what makes life worth living. And the drinking and the feasting isn't doing it for him. And the multiplying of wives and concubines isn't doing it for him. And gathering all the wealth in the world isn't doing it for him. And entering into alliances with all the nations around him so that he doesn't have to worry about war and famine and pestilence in his land. None of that's doing it for him, because he's got a hole in his heart, like every human being has, that's God-sized. And nothing and nobody can plug that hole except a relationship with God. Who knows what's good for a man during his lifetime? And the answer is God knows. During the few years of his futile life, he will then spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Solomon's thinking about the future, and he's realizing there's an expiration date on his life. There's an expiration date on every human being's life. And if you've got kids, you want your kids to live on and to produce grandchildren, and for them and the generations that follow to have a good life. And even if you don't have kids, you might wish for a better world. You want to leave the world a better place than when you found it, but you also don't want to be forgotten. Solomon is still thinking here in terms of, okay, I'm only going to live for a few years. Even if I live to be an old man, in the grand scheme of life and eternity, we're just here for a short time. Why are we here? Why does it matter what we do? What's the purpose in life? Do we have something to look for in the future, even after we die? Is there life after death? And the answer is yes. And the correct answer, too, is that, Solomon, there's something you got to know. That life after death, your eternity is sealed by what you did while you were on earth. You either followed God. You either put your faith and trust in Him. Yeah, you mess up sometimes. But you either trusted God and God's goodness and His mercy towards you. Or you live your life and you realize, when I die, the stuff is going to be tossed out, given away, or sold. And in just a few years, everybody who ever knew me will be gone. At the cemetery where my husband is buried, it happens to be a veterans section. There are some graves that people regularly go visit. The person who died still has loved ones or friends in the area, and they'll go to the cemetery and they'll change out the flower arrangements, or they'll see that fresh flags. We just had Memorial Day where the cemetery puts out American flags, but sometimes the individual who's died's family members will put an American flag, or they may put the service branch flag for the Army, Navy, Air Force, whichever branch they served in. Sometimes they may put religious flags or religious symbols there. You'll see some graves that have crucifixes hung on them, or somebody who will have Easter lilies because that person is a Christian. But there are graves in the cemetery where the vases are empty and they get filled up with water when we have a lot of rain, and it's the cemetery staff that's got to go clean them out. And there are some graves that there's never any sign that anybody was there, that whoever knew them and loved them is long gone, either long gone from the area or gone into eternity themselves. Solomon, when he was asking the question about what's the purpose in life, of what kind of a legacy you're going to leave, he's realizing that if all you're doing is taking care of number one, feeding yourself, taking care of enjoying life for yourself on your own terms, doing it your way, then when you're gone, you're gone. And that if you live that kind of a life, you've really wasted it. As he continues thinking about life and eternity matters, as next week we're going to look at chapters 7 through 9, he's starting to realize, okay, the hole is God-sized, and it's only God that's going to be able to fill that hole. So instead of looking back and saying, what was the purpose of everything, now he's finding things that give life meaning and purpose. Now he's realizing things like, yeah, it makes a difference that you have a good name, that the people who physically live on beyond you remember fondly something about you and the way you lived your life, that they celebrate the fact that you lived. He's starting to realize that God's in control of your history, and that if you put your faith and trust in His hands, that your life does have meaning not only while you're here, but meaning for eternity. So next week you want to read chapters 7, 8, and 9. Thanks for watching.